Oxford, England. For over 1,000 years, this city has stood at the crossroads of power, knowledge, and rebellion. Kings have made it their capital and fought for its control. Students have debated in its halls, while wars raged outside its walls. This is a place where the future of England was decided, where minds were shaped that would change the world, and where ordinary people fought, survived, and built something that would outlast empires. Today, using advanced AI techniques, we can transform centuries-old engravings and faded photographs into vivid, lifelike scenes, bringing Oxford's remarkable past to life in ways never before possible. We're going to walk through every century of this city's existence, from a muddy river crossing to one of the most famous cities on Earth. You'll see triumph and tragedy, genius and brutality, plague and rebirth. This is the complete story of Oxford. Let's begin at the beginning.
Not many people know this, but Oxford's story actually begins before the Saxons. Archaeological evidence reveals a small Roman settlement here, including a kiln and pottery workshops. In 2003, excavations unearthed a Roman pot dating to around 100 AD, proof that people were living and working on this site nearly 2,000 years ago. But the Romans never built anything significant here. They came, they made their pottery, and they left. The real story of Oxford begins with the Saxons. The name Oxford means exactly what you think, a ford where oxen crossed. Around the 8th century, Saxon settlers needed a way to get their livestock across the Timpanese, and they find a shallow point near where two rivers meet. The Timpanese, known locally as the Isis and the Cherwell, close to what's now Folly Bridge. It's practical, nothing more. A few houses appear, then a few more. The place becomes known as Oxenfordr in the Saxon tongue. But Oxford's spiritual foundation comes from a Saxon princess named Freedwide. According to legend, around 727 AD, Freedwide is a young noblewoman who refuses marriage to a local king, choosing instead to dedicate her life to God. She establishes a small monastery here, building a church on the site where Christ Church Cathedral stands today. Whether all the legends about her are true doesn't really matter. What matters is that her church becomes Oxford's first significant religious building, and Freedwide herself becomes the city's patron saint. The priory she founds will stand for centuries. By 911, things start to get serious. England is being carved up by Viking invaders, and Edward the Elder, King of Wessex, recognizes that this river crossing has strategic value. He builds fortifications here, transforming a simple ford into a fortified town. Oxford becomes part of a defensive network protecting Wessex from Danish attack. The town sits on the border between Saxon and Viking territory, and that tension defines its early years. In 1002, something horrific happens. King Ethel the Unready orders what becomes known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre. On November 13th, Saxons across England are commanded to kill all Danish settlers in their midst. In Oxford, terrified Danes flee to St. Freedwide's church, seeking sanctuary. The locals bar the doors and set the building on fire. Everyone inside burns to death. Among the dead is Gunhild, sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, the King of Denmark. This single act of violence ensures that Sweyn will return with a massive army to exact revenge. But Oxford survives. And as the 11th century approaches, this rough border town is about to be caught in the greatest invasion England will ever face. 1066 arrives, and with it, William the Conqueror. Oxford submits to William without a fight, but submission doesn't mean trust. Within 2 years, William orders the construction of Oxford Castle, a massive stone fortress designed to intimidate the population and control the surrounding territory. Robert Doy, one of William's most trusted knights, oversees the building. The message is clear. Norman power is here to stay. The castle includes St. George's Tower, which still stands today. It's not ornamental, it's a weapon, a symbol of occupation in stone. The Normans confiscate Saxon properties, redistribute land, and impose their language and laws on a resentful population. But something unexpected begins to grow in Oxford's shadow. By the early 12th century, scholars start gathering here. No one knows exactly when formal teaching begins, but by the 1120s, there are documented lectures taking place. Why Oxford? Partly because it's centrally located, partly because it sits at a crossroads, and partly because the church is powerful here. In 1133, Osney Abbey is founded just outside the town, adding to Oxford's growing reputation as a center of religious learning. Then civil war in 1141. England tears itself apart in a conflict known as the Anarchy, fought between Empress Matilda and King Stephen over who should rule. Oxford becomes a battleground. Matilda seizes Oxford Castle and holds it against Stephen's forces. He lays siege to the castle in the winter of 1142. For 3 months, Matilda's garrison holds out, but eventually the situation becomes desperate. On a December night, with the temps frozen solid, Matilda and 3 of her knights escape by dressing in white cloaks to blend with the snow. They slip across the frozen river and flee to Wallingford. It's one of the most dramatic escapes in medieval English history, and it happens right here. The next day, Oxford Castle surrenders to Stephen. He takes control of the city, but Matilda herself has slipped through his fingers. The war drags on for another 11 years in a bitter stalemate, neither side strong enough to defeat the other. Eventually, exhausted by endless fighting, they reach a compromise. Stephen keeps the throne for his lifetime, but Matilda's son, Henry, will inherit it when Stephen dies. Matilda came within a sword's edge of the English crown, but it wasn't to be. England wouldn't have a crowned queen ruling in her own right for another 412 years, until Mary Tudor took the throne in 1553. But even during those years of chaos and siege, scholars had kept coming to Oxford, and now, with peace restored, their numbers swell. The real catalyst comes in 1167. Henry II, furious with France, bans English students from attending the University of Paris. They need somewhere to go, and many choose Oxford. The trickle of scholars becomes a flood. Informal teaching arrangements solidify into something more permanent. Oxford is becoming a university town, though no one uses that word yet. By the late 12th century, Oxford has survived conquest, massacre, siege, and escape. But its most important transformation is only beginning. The 13th century is when Oxford stops being just another town and becomes something unique. Students and scholars are everywhere now, living in lodging houses, attending lectures in rented rooms, and frequently getting into violent brawls with locals. Town and gown tensions run deep. In 1209, a scholar kills a local woman. The townspeople, enraged, hang 2 of his innocent colleagues in retaliation. In protest, many scholars pack up and leave Oxford entirely. Some go to Cambridge, where they establish a rival university. It's a split that will define English academia forever. Oxford's first colleges appeared during this century. University College, Bale, and Merton all claim to be the oldest, each founded in the 1260s and 1270s. These are a new model for education, self-governing communities of scholars with their own rules, their own finances, and their own endowments. The idea is revolutionary learning supported by permanent institutions rather than the whims of individual teachers. But Oxford isn't peaceful. In 1248, there's a riot so severe that the university suspends operations entirely. Scholars and townspeople clash repeatedly throughout the century. The violence reflects deeper resentments. Students are often exempt from local laws. They drive up rents. They're rowdy and arrogant. The locals work hard for their living, and they resent these privileged young men treating their town like a playground. By 1284, Merton College establishes the first proper academic structure, with fellows, statutes, and a formal curriculum. Other colleges quickly follow the model. The University of Oxford is no longer just an idea. It's a physical reality built in stone, and it's changing the character of the entire town. Then, in the 14th century, something comes that's worse than any riot. The 14th century is a time when you definitely wouldn't have wanted to live in Oxford. First, in 1348, the Black Death reaches England. By 1349, it's in Oxford. The plague kills indiscriminately. Scholars, townspeople, monks, merchants, no one is safe. Estimates suggest that between a third and half of Oxford's population dies within months. Entire households are wiped out. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. The university nearly collapses from lack of students and teachers. Then, only a few years later, disease turns into violence. February 10th, 1355, St. Scholastica's Day. Two students drinking at the Swindletop Tavern complain about the quality of the wine. The landlord argues back. Insults fly, then punches. Then the students throw their drinks in his face. The situation spirals out of control. For 3 days, Oxford descends into chaos. Townspeople attack scholars with swords and bows. Scholars fight back with whatever they can find. By the time the violence ends, 63 students and 30 townspeople are dead. The aftermath is brutal. King Edward III sides with the university. As punishment, Oxford's mayor and council are forced to attend a mass every year for the dead scholars and pay annual penance. This humiliating ritual continues for 470 years, but Oxford rebuilds. New colleges rise from the ashes. New College is founded in 1379 with a revolutionary architectural plan, and All Souls College follows in 1438, specifically to pray for those killed in the Hundred Red Years' War. The 15th century brings relative stability, but the 16th century brings religious upheaval. Henry VIII breaks with Rome in 1534, and Oxford, so deeply connected to the Catholic Church, is thrown into turmoil. Monasteries are dissolved, relics are destroyed, and scholars are forced to choose sides. The city's religious houses, Osney Abbey, Rewley Abbey, and others are torn down, their stones repurposed for new buildings. Then the first Queen of England arrives, Mary I, Bloody Mary, a Catholic queen determined to reverse her father's reforms. In 1555 and 1556, Oxford becomes the site of some of the most infamous executions in English history. 3 men, Thomas Cranmer, the literal Archbishop of Canterbury, Bishop Hugh Latimer, and Bishop Nicholas Ridley, are burned at the stake for heresy in what is now Broad Street. Their deaths are meant to terrify, but instead, they inspire. A memorial, the Martyrs' Memorial, will later be erected on the spot where Protestant England remembers its dead. Oxford has survived plague and riot, but now it must survive the violent swings of religious reformation, and the next century will test it like never before. 1642, England is at war with itself. King Charles I and Parliament are locked in a struggle for power, and Oxford finds itself at the center of the conflict. Charles chooses Oxford as his capital after being driven from London. For 4 years, from 1642 to 1646, Oxford is a royalist stronghold. The king and his court take up residence in Christ Church. Colleges are turned into barracks, ammunition stores, and weapon workshops. The city's beautiful quadrangles echo with the sounds of drilling soldiers and cannon fire. Life in Civil War Oxford is hard. Food is scarce, disease spreads, and the constant threat of siege hangs over everyone. Parliamentarian forces surround the city multiple times, cutting off supply lines. Students continue their studies as best they can, but many abandon their books to fight. In 1646, the war turns decisively against the king. Oxford is besieged one final time, and Charles, realizing the situation is hopeless, disguises himself as a servant and flees the city under cover of darkness. Oxford surrenders shortly afterward. Parliament's troops march in, and the royalist dream dies. The victorious parliamentarians systematically demolish most of the medieval stonework of Oxford Castle to ensure it can never be used as a royalist stronghold again. Only St. George's Tower is spared. It's needed as the county prison. The Norman Motte, the great urn mound built in the 1070s, still stands in Oxford today. The restoration of Charles II in 1660 brings Oxford back into royal favor. The king remembers the city's loyalty, and he pours money into building projects. The Shelonian Theatre, designed by a young Christopher Wren in 1664, is a masterpiece of the era. It's one of Wren's first major works, and it shows the confidence of a city emerging from trauma. Then in 1681, Charles calls a parliament in Oxford to avoid London's hostile crowds. It meets in the Convocation House and lasts just a week before Charles dissolves it. It's the last time an English parliament meets outside London. Oxford ends the 17th century scarred but intact, its university stronger than ever. And as a new century dawns, the city is about to enter its golden age. The 18th century is Oxford's age of reason. The university produces some of the greatest minds in British history. John Locke's ideas on governance and liberty spread across Europe and inspire revolutions. Adam Smith studies here before writing The Wealth of Nations. Edmund Halley, the astronomer, becomes civilian professor of geometry and predicts the return of the comet that will bear his name. New colleges continue to appear. Worcester College is founded in 1714, rising from the ruins of Gloucester College. The city's streets are paved, new bridges are built, and the infrastructure improves. Oxford is no longer a medieval relic. It's becoming a modern city. The city is also expanding physically. The Radcliffe Camera, one of Oxford's most iconic buildings, is completed in 1749. Designed by James Gibbs, it's a circular library, unlike anything else in England. Funded by a bequest from Dr. John Radcliffe, it becomes the reading room of the Bodleian Library, one of the oldest libraries in Europe, and symbolizes Oxford's commitment to knowledge. Yet the university remains deeply conservative. Religious tests exclude anyone who isn't Anglican. Catholics, Protestant dissenters, and Jews cannot attend. Women are completely barred. The curriculum is rigid, focused on classics and theology, while the natural sciences are largely ignored. Critics call Oxford sleepy and out of touch, more interested in port and privilege than progress. Underneath the calm surface, tensions simmer. The town still resents the gown. Riots occasionally flare up, though nothing like the violence of previous centuries. The university tightens its grip on the city's governance, controlling trade and politics in ways that breed resentment among merchants and workers. As the 18th century ends, Oxford is beautiful, wealthy, and intellectually vibrant, but it's also deeply complacent, and the industrial age is about to force it to change. The 19th century transforms Oxford from a medieval university town into an industrial city. The Oxford Canal opens in 1790, connecting Oxford to the National Waterway Network. Coal, iron, and manufactured goods flow in. Agricultural produce flows out. Trade booms. Then in 1844, the Great Western Railway arrives. Oxford is now connected to London, Birmingham, and beyond. Travel that once took days now takes hours. The railway brings tourists. Middle-class Victorians flock to Oxford to admire the dreaming spires and walk through ancient quads. The city becomes romanticized in literature and art, but the railway also brings industry. Working-ass suburbs spring up around the station. Factories appear. The population explodes from around 12,000 in 1801 to over 49,000 by 1901. The university undergoes its own revolution. In 1854, Parliament forces Oxford to open its doors wider. Religious tests are gradually abolished, allowing denters and Catholics to enroll. In 1878, the first women's colleges are established, Lady Margaret Hall and Somerville College. Women can attend lectures and take exams. though they won't receive full degrees until 1920. Academic standards rise dramatically. The sciences finally get their due. The University Museum of Natural History opens in 1860, a Gothic revival masterpiece housing Britain's growing scientific collections. The Oxford Movement, a religious revival led by John Henry Newman, shakes the Church of England to its core. Churches are decorated again with stained glass and ornate altars, and remarkably, they help restore Christmas itself. Since Oliver Cromwell banned Christmas in the 1650s, the holiday had been muted, almost forgotten. The Tractarians bring it back. Church decorations, special, musical services, charity events for the poor. By the 1870s, the Victorian Christmas we recognize today is in full bloom, thanks in part to Oxford. In 1896, something revolutionary happens. William Morris, not the famous designer, but a local businessman, founds Morris Motors in a garage in Longwall Street. He starts by making bicycles, then motorcycles, then cars. It's a tiny operation at first, but it will grow into one of Britain's major automobile manufacturers and transform Oxford's economy forever. As the 19th century closes, Oxford is caught between two identities, the ancient university and the modern industrial city, and the 20th century will force it to reconcile them. When World War I breaks out in 1914, Oxford throws itself into the war effort. The university empties as students and dons enlist. The colleges are turned into hospitals and officer training facilities. Over 14,000 Oxford alumni serve in the war, and more than 2,700 are killed. The war memorials that appear in college chapels afterward are sobering reminders of a lost generation. William Morris's young car company, barely a year old, immediately stops production and transforms into a munitions factory. The Cowie Works become part of the Trench Warfare Department, producing 50,000 naval mines, sinkers, and Stokes trench mortars. The assembly lines that once built civilian cars now build weapons of war. After the war, Morris Motors explodes. By the 1920s, it's producing thousands of cars annually. The Morris Oxford, Morris Minor, and later the Mini become icons of British motoring. Cowie becomes a working-class industrial district, a stark contrast to the university's ancient streets. Thousands of workers flood into Oxford for factory jobs. The population surges. Housing estates spring up. The city's economy diversifies beyond the university for the first time in centuries. But not everyone is happy about it. The private developers build walls. By 1934, 9-foot-high brick barriers topped with revolving spikes are built, cutting right through streets and physically separating the council estate from the private homes. Residents of the Cutts estate wake up one morning to find their routes blocked, their access to shops and schools suddenly longer, their very existence declared inferior. The outrage was immediate. Protests erupted. The Oxford Mail ran blistering editorials. Working-class groups organized demonstrations, but the wall stayed up. For 25 years, the barriers stand, a physical monument to class division. Finally, in 1959, after years of campaigning, the walls come down. Bulldozers reduce them to rubble. Even today, walk through Oxford and you'll pass from cobblestone college quadrangles to working-class neighborhoods in 5 minutes. Two worlds still not quite touching. Meanwhile, as Oxford was grappling with its divisions, another kind of creation was underway. And it all starts in a pub called the Eagle and Child. Every Tuesday morning, starting in the 1930s, a group calling themselves the Inklings meets to drink beer and read unfinished manuscripts aloud. Two World War I veterans, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, both damaged by the trenches, both searching for meaning in a mechanized age, are busy creating mythologies that will redefine fantasy literature forever. The Lord of the Rings, the Chronicles of Narnia, the Screwtape Letters, all of them drafted, debated, and refined in Oxford pubs and college rooms. When World War II begins in 1939, Oxford is terrified of bombing. The government considers evacuating the university. Blackout curtains go up, air raid shelters are dug, and the city prepares for the worst. The Morris Works shifts to war production again, building tanks, munitions, and aircraft parts. Women fill the factory floors as men go to fight. Oxford becomes a center for codering and secret intelligence work, with academics recruited into government service. And in a laboratory at the Dunn School of Pathology, two scientists are racing against time on a project that will save many more lives. Howard Florey and Ernst Chain are working to purify and mass-produce penicillin. Alexander Fleming discovered the mold in London, but it was Oxford that figured out how to turn it into medicine. By 1942, they've succeeded. Penicillin becomes the wonder drug of the war, saving countless soldiers from infections that would have killed them in previous conflicts. It's one of the most important medical breakthroughs in human history, and it happens in Oxford. Miraculously, Oxford is largely spared in World War II. Hitler reportedly orders his Luftwaffe to avoid bombing the city because he intends to make it his capital of occupied Britain. Whether this is true or propaganda is debated, but the fact remains. While Coventry, London, and Birmingham are devastated, Oxford survives almost unscathed. Then on May 6, 1954, something remarkable happens at Oxford's Iffley Road track. Roger Bannister, a medical student at the university, runs a mile in 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. It's the first time in recorded history that anyone has broken the 4-minute barrier. The achievement captures the world's imagination and proves that human limits are often just assumptions waiting to be shattered. The university admits more students than ever before, including increasing numbers of women and international students. In 1974, the first 5 men's colleges finally admit women, breaking centuries of tradition. Meanwhile, Morris Motors had merged with Austin to form the British Motor Corporation, then becomes part of British Leyland in 1968. The company struggles through strikes, poor management, and competition from foreign car makers. By the 1980s, British Land collapses. The Cowie plant survives under new ownership, eventually becoming part of BMW and producing the reborn Mini. But the glory days of British car manufacturing are over. The next question is, how does Oxford fare in the modern times? Today, Oxford is a city of about 165,000 people, and the university remains its heart. 39 colleges now operate, educating around 25,000 students from across the globe. Oxford consistently ranks as one of the top 3 universities worldwide. Its alumni include 28 British prime ministers, over 70 Nobel Prize winners, and countless other professionals. Stephen Hawking, Oscar Wilde, Hugh Grant, Bill Clinton, Emma Watson, the list goes on and on. The city's economy has transformed yet again. The car plant in Cowie still operates, now owned by BMW and producing the Mini. But Oxford's real growth is in technology, pharmaceuticals, and research. The COVID-19 pandemic puts Oxford on the global stage in 2020. Scientists at the university, working with AstraZeneca, developed one of the first effective vaccines. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is distributed to billions of people worldwide, saving countless lives. But modern Oxford faces challenges. Housing is extortionately expensive, pushing out working-class families. Traffic is a nightmare. The city struggles to balance tourism, which brings millions of visitors annually, with the needs of residents. Town and gown tensions persist in new forms. Disputes over universities' enormous wealth, while local services are underfunded. Oxford today is a living paradox, ancient and cutting edge, exclusive and diverse, beautiful and troubled, inspiring and frustrating. And it continues to shape the world in ways both profound and subtle. From a muddy ford where oxen crossed a river to one of the most famous cities on earth, Oxford's story is one of survival, reinvention, and relentless forward motion. Oxford's history is messy, contradictory, and deeply human. Much like any other city, it's not perfect and never has been. But as this video has shown, Oxford has so much to be proud about and will continue to forge the world's greatest minds for decades to come. If you've enjoyed this journey through Oxford's complete history, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the cities that shaped the world. And as always, we'll see you in the past.